Hello everyone, today on the Doctor Who Guide I'm super excited to be giving a spoiler-free review of Big Finish's Once and Future Part 2, The Artist at the End of Time by James Goss. I'm your host Alex Patterson. Once again, I listened to all of Once and Future, The Artist at the End of Time, plus the extras and the music track whilst I was on my treadmill. Got in about 4 miles because it took about 2 hours to listen through everything. So that was really fun, and again, I'm going to be keeping this review spoiler-free because I want as many people as possible to get into Once and Future. So I will be keeping it spoiler-free, but from the cover art, we know that Peter Davison is playing the Doctor, Georgia Tennant is back playing Jenny, as well as Colin Baker playing the Curator, which is very intriguing and very exciting as well. So with Once and Future Part 2, James Goss has given us a story that feels very different in tone to Once and Future Part 1. It's a smaller cast, and if it weren't for the many different locations in the story, it would actually make for like a great play. So far, each installment of the Once and Future series has had this meta layer that seems to be talking directly to the fans. In Once and Future 1, Robert Valentine gave us characters struggling with the concept of nostalgia, hoping to recreate old times, but it also makes us consider that even if we brought back all of these, characters that we know and love from the past, that we can't recreate nostalgia, the nostalgia that we know and remember from the past, just by virtue of the fact that we remember that nostalgia. We can create something wonderful and new with a mix of old, current, and future characters, and we can create something incredible, but it's not going to be a recreation of exactly what it once was. As Once and Future highlights the Doctor's own mortality and how he deals with that, it makes us as fans consider our own aging and mortality. The second installment takes on this wonderful concept of art and collecting and value of items and how we value art, but really kind of calls out collectors. And it's almost ironic that a story with this moral was available on limited edition CD, but I loved how James Goss tackled that concept. It was a very clever script and calls out against paying super high prices for everything. That is a running theme throughout the audio. James Goss gives us a fifth Doctor that is in denial as to what is going on, is not yet processing any of the grief that is involved in the challenge that he is facing throughout the Once and Future series. And it kind of adds to his recklessness in the situation. And so that's something that Jenny's character has to contend with. And Georgia Tennant does a wonderful job playing Jenny's character and delivers an ironically very fully human range of emotion to the character, bringing a confidence and intelligence. And as Jenny attempts to solve the same mystery as the Doctor, their paths cross and eventually lead them to the Curator, as played by Colin Baker. And all three of them do a wonderful job with their performances. Peter Davison sounds incredibly close to his on-screen episodes, especially considering that we recently had the 40th anniversary of his very first episode of Doctor Who, and so I love that about his performance. He's facing this degeneration process that is really causing him to have to think about and remember and rediscover what it means to be the Doctor. And this harkens back to the 5 Doctors, the 20th anniversary episode, but that's not the only reference to that story as well. So I love this 60th anniversary story having tie-ins with the 5 Doctors for the 20th. And James Goss expertly throws in a lot of fun little references for us Doctor Who fans. Georgia Tennant does a wonderful job portraying Jenny, who takes on the role of a pseudo Romana, equal to the Doctor in many ways, sometimes his superior, and yet there are things that she still has to learn from the Doctor, and it just reminded me a lot of that kind of Romana dynamic. Then we have Colin Baker as the Curator, not as the 6th Doctor, as the Curator, who is a very different character. In some ways, the fact that we don't know the origins of the Curator or why there's now a different Curator from the Tom Baker Curator that we saw in The Day of the Doctor, it is in some ways more true to the original role of the Doctor back in the 60s with the first Doctor. When we first met the first Doctor, we didn't know where he had come from, his origins, didn't know that he was a Time Lord. As the series developed into the beginning of the 70s and we got, Gallifrey and Time Lords became a thing, the character kind of lost a little bit of the Who in Doctor Who. Some of the mystery was gone. And so with the Curator, a very doctor-y character, but there's now all this mystery around who this character is, right? So that was kind of really cool to see, and I loved what Colin Baker did with the role. I think the curator, for me, even stole the show a little bit from the Fifth Doctor, and that's not a bad thing. The Fifth Doctor still had a lot of focus and definitely took up his own part of the show, but both roles were always going to have to share the spotlight, and did that very well. But I am sad that there's not a single Once and Future story for the Sixth Doctor, because the Fourth Doctor has gotten his own story, and the Seventh Doctor is now going to get his own story, and so I would have loved to have seen a separate story for the Sixth Doctor. But if that had been the case, then we might not have ever gotten this Sixth Doctor curator character. The supporting cast in this story were great, and I think they deserve a shout out. And shout out to director Ken Bentley for expertly bringing this off the page into the audio format. And I have to give a huge shout out to Howard Carter, who composed the music for this story once again, and also did the sound design. Really well done. The music has a wonderful feeling of cinematicness to it, a lot of scene changes and different things to handle sound design and music wise. So well done to Howard Carter. Extras, you heard from everybody in the cast, which was quite fun. Georgia Tennant, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, as well as the supporting cast. And the new extras included a roundtable discussion style interview with producer David Richardson, director Ken Bentley, and music and sound designer Howard Carter. And so that was great to hear them talk about the huge scale of this project, what it was like to work on it for so long, and just the logistical behemoth of a challenge that was getting all of these stories recorded when the actors were all available. That was just incredible to hear about. And shout out to script editor Matt Fitton for tying this whole operation together. And again, the cliffhanger has left me wanting so much more. It just looks like a really exciting and big story. If you want to go more in depth and spoilery about this story, then definitely do so in the comments. And if you don't want any spoilers, then I recommend avoiding the comments or being very careful if you are going to leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching. Stay safe, keep growing your knowledge collection and connection with other Doctor Who fans. Albert the Adipose says hello, and we both hope to see you in the next video. Bye!